Two streams for the price of one. I was not intending to do more than one today, but I had made a pledge to my subscribers to do something during the afternoon, and I figured what better way to follow up the most overrated president of all time, JFK, with the second most overrated of all time. Um, so anyone who's watched or paid attention to debates within Republican primaries for the last three, maybe four election cycles, 2008, 2012, 2016, has noticed a recurring theme where every time they speak, they have this thing about, it's all right, Envoy, they have this thing about mentioning Reagan in light of some position they've taken. Let me say hello to Dirk as well. Um, and after a while, just year after year after year of Reagan getting mentioned over and over again, you say to yourself, this must have been some really great, monumental, historical figure. And I have news for you. Uh, not so much. So let's start on the. Okay, Winterfresh says, I like Roosevelt. He practiced martial arts and employed uh, the outdoors. Yeah, yeah. Tr is actually kind of getting underrated at this point, but he is, his thing is warranted. That's why his face is on Mount Rushmore. Dirk says not more overrated than JFK. Definitely not. But see, here's the thing. Whereas JFK had very, very few legislative accomplishments, Reagan was the opposite of that. Actually, did multiple things that were related to laws. Um, so effectively, what we've kind of seen, it's a reverse where with JFK, a lot of it has to do with getting murdered. With Reagan, a lot of it has to do with, as TYT explained, the fact that he's the only Republican president from living memory that had a higher approval rating than a negative rating within his own party. People have woken up to the failures of George W. People don't like HW because they think he was too liberal, at least in the Republican Party. And we could sit here all day talking about Trump. So um, once again, depicting America's issue and their lust for arms/firearms. Yeah, going on about the Iran Contra deal. Yeah, yeah, selling arms for hostages to terrorists, which I would think was, it's kind of funny. Reagan was elected on saying that Carter was too weak during the Iran hostage crisis. Um, Yet whether it was pulling out of Beirut after those 200, I think it was Americans were killed, over 200. It turned out to be a complete replica of him in a regard. And I'm not even saying it's bad to get out of a country once there's violence and save lives, but you can't have it both ways. That should let everyone know how countries truly work. Yeah, the crooks at the top get away with all, people get away with all kind of crooked things when they're in positions of power. Soldiers and even civilians are nothing but pawns. All right, Envoy, I'm gonna respond back to you. But I need to keep the ball rolling here. Um, so let me just state that, going back to what I said in the last stream about how, despite what I'm saying here, I don't dislike the person I'm talking about. I'm not really that opposed to Reagan in term when you compare him to. I'll take him any day over Trump or George W. Um, and Reagan's personal life actually is a very inspiring, when he came from poverty and was able to raise himself out of that circumstance. Whereas with Kennedy, you're born with a spoon in your mouth. So he certainly can earn my personal respect for. No, the Brady bill was under Clinton, which that will go back to a legacy thing, because the worst part relating to Reagan, in my opinion, is the current era. I solely credit the his election and Reaganomics and just everything associated with him being in office with the current neoliberal, conservative light faction of the Democrats, the majority of the elected office Democrats, and the pushing to the further right of Republicans. That was something I have to give him credit for, even if I despise the fact that it happened. if you look at Dukakis's loss in the 1988 election and the Democrats' 4 years of thinking, how are we going to beat the Republicans? And their solution with Clinton of going, oh yeah, we'll be centrist slash a little bit more like them. So it became this kind of game of who's more right wing than the other person. Okay, Envoy says, you believe his term also impact the ways Americans view firearms now and their insatiable love for guns. Um, you know, I would probably say that he himself isn't. I'm trying to think of it. Who do I blame for firearms? Let's see. I'm really. That's actually a good question. I've never sat back and thought under whose tenure did guns just become horrible. You know, Trump's been awful on that. Obama's been okay, or was okay rather. Um, George W. was awful. Clinton was decent. The older Bush was decent. So yeah, I can't think of any gun control he signed. So referring to Reagan, so I would probably say that's the beginning of it because the cowboy image and old rough and ready, all that. Let me say hello to MLG. See what else is here. Envoy's over there giggling about him being an actor. Let's see here. I want to make sure I'm addressing everything that's been written so far. Um, but what I've kind of grown to despise is that people, a lot of these conservatives nowadays actively, and again, this is in their view of him, right? They'll say, "Oh, Reagan's my hero," yada yada yada. You look at Pence, he was blindly praising him. You look at Trump, first he was skeptical, and then he kind of started embracing him a little bit more. And it's really weird when you sit here and think about how they're kind of polar opposites at this point. So, for example, a lot of people, when it comes to fiscal conservatives, those are the individuals who are against government programs because they, will take. It's going to increase the amount of cash we're putting out. You know, they say, oh, we need to cut this, need to cut that. When Reagan campaigned, he was advocating against keeping the education department, which at that point was a relatively new thing. But then in being in office, and you can look this up for yourself, Reagan tripled the debt, nearly tripled the debt, how do I put this? His 8 years in office back in from 1981 to 1989 added more to the deficit than the first 80 years of the 20th century. And now you look at the people who praise him, that call themselves being concerned about balancing the budget. And that's their icon, the person who literally in 8 years raised more money to the deficit than any of the presidents that served in that those first 80 years of the century that he was in office. That's their that's their role model. Then you look at the amnesty toward illegal immigrants and the current hawkishness of we need to get them out of here. They won't, as what was it Kelly said a couple of days ago, they won't integrate properly into society because they're rural or some kind of nonsense. But that was one of the few things he did that I actually would give him credit for, because even if I say, oh well, he signed MLK Day into law, that was still after some proverbial arm twisting, and Jesse Helms sitting up there in the Senate trying to smear King posthumously and find any way he could be opposed to that holiday. So even in areas where he did something decent, it's still, yeah, MLG. I think you're trolling me. So we're gonna not even bother with that. Anyone who's writing, if you're really writing that sentence and you know my views by now, you already know those are fighting words. So I'll leave that alone. You can keep typing that to yourself. Um, but I really think it's amazing how because even with the people who blindly praise Kennedy, at the very least they're kind of, for them, you can't argue too much against them, and or at least their views not being aligned with his, except for foreign policy, which even then is still kind of eh. Was anyone here employed? Uh, Yeah, was anyone here employed? Answer that question. So we'll find out. So if anyone here was employed during Reagan's presidency, please answer and knock. Let me say hello to Saber Wolf. Yeah, we're just in here talking about a another, yeah, Envoy. I wasn't even alive either. People have this thing where I guess they forget that Reagan left office 29 years ago. So, or maybe they just don't want to remember the truth. That's why when I still see people trying to make it seem as if you know, he would have done this, he would have done that. Many of these issues are, I mean, you have to think about it in the context of, at that point, the internet was primitive. There was no such thing as cyber terrorism. It really shows you how much the world's evolved in a short span of decades. So, it's continuing of evolution. But as I explained earlier, the only reason people, at least Republicans, try to make him their role model is because he's the only member of that party that served in a recent enough amount in living memory to you know have people go out and praise him and think of him fondly. We need more vids of overrated. I don't think too many of them, at least in of the current. Yeah, I definitely would do underrated because there's many of those. And I guess that's what bugs me the most, that it feels like every time I would go and look at these top 10 polls of the greatest presidents and I see Reagan and JFK on there, and you see, the older Bush near the 20th place, and then uh, LBJ further down, I'm just thinking to myself, what is this? Is this rigged? Oh, because this person gave a speech that matters more than a law that impacted the lives of hundreds and thousands of people. And Reagan's Reaganomics was awful, by the way. Just to point that out, and it contributed to the destruction of the older Bush's tenure, because thanks to this idea of, we're just gonna do whatever we want and not worry about what happens in the future, which is basically him saying, hey, whatever you guys are screwed up in later on, I won't be here anyway, so you can't get at me for this. Um, you had people who, had their taxes raised by the older Bush, who had to renege on his campaign promise not to do so, which is ironic because under Reagan, who he was trying to align himself as the successor to, um, we saw 11 tax increases. Yeah, MLG is just, I don't know, maybe he's had one too many today. Again, if I were to give him just a number ranking, I'd put him slightly above. Okay, so definitely, like, out of the last, all the ones since JFK, he's probably in the bottom 6, 7. So I think he was better than Clinton. I think he was better than the younger Bush. Definitely better than Trump. Maybe Obama's tied with him. They're kind of around there because Obama's got decent marks on foreign policy. Oh yeah, knock. I'm no fan of his at all. But I'm saying that, you know, in light of what we've had since, I'm not too ready to go and praise them or put them in a lower marking than they are. Um, just because I've already stated the continuous cycle of policies I'm sick of, that people glance over and you don't see on the news, and so they can make you think, oh, if I vote for one or the other, I get a real change. When we've already dissected on this channel multiple times why that's anything but the case. That. Okay, what else is here? Kanak says it was pretty hard for a working man to get in a 40-hour work week. Here. I mean, I'm just reading these, making sure I'm keeping on with everything else. Looks like Envoy went to sleep, so He probably counted some sheep while I was talking. Do I have hope for America's future? Uh, People have shown that there is a faction of us who are paying attention to glaring problems, but just in general, I'm kind of mixed on it. There's in some ways yes, in some ways no. How about that? Like I think there's a 50 or 40% chance, 45% chance things improve in some ways. That question is just too vague for me. I don't know what it's meant to say. I know it must be difficult to be president, but do you think you could have easily done? Do you think they could have easily done better? Oh, and by the way, let me respond to Envoy's ZZs. Hey, Saberwolf, I want you to type quieter because we need to make sure he doesn't Envoy doesn't wake up. Do I think they could have easily done better? Definitely. Um, and I guess what people need to understand is that yes, it is very troubling and hard to be commander in chief. There are many decisions you have to make, and you have to figure things out. But my problem with all of these, at least recent, just members of the executive branch, every 4 or 8 years, is that they surround themselves with people who advocate for positions that are diametrically opposed to doing much of anything good for certain parts of the, I guess, the population. So, for example, um, you had Reagan, prior to getting in office, as I mentioned earlier, being against the education department. Now, you ask yourself, what you argued against having this department, and you say that it's too much cash going to this, but then under your tenure and your various budget proposals, you just increase and just expand and expand spending. See, those are things I don't buy because you can't have it both ways, and I don't buy this idea that you know people are so entrenched by the office they can't get the fog out of their eye and wake up and recognize what's wrong and what's going on. Okay. Trump doesn't seem so worried much about all his golf making. He doesn't seem worried at all. But yeah, there are glaring issues that need to be fixed. And another thing I just remembered with Reagan was the lack of action um, or attempt to veto legislation against the apartheid in South Africa at the time, which was overridden by Congress. Now, for those of you who remember, that's during I hope you guys remember. But that's another thing relating to things he did foreign wise that I'm not a fan of. The bombings, just I'm sick of it, and it's under his tenure that I really believe we experienced, because people who say that he ushered in the era of conservative realignment with both of these parties, I believe are correct. They're true in the fact that the Democrats felt the need to become more right wing, and the Republicans just took it even further up, judging by many of the position differences that they have with Reagan at this point, who, you know, I sometimes don't even think would be electable in that party right now. Um, and they do that, but again, it goes back to revisionist history, where if you ask them about their positions, and you mention, they'll likely tell you, oh, Reagan did it, whatever. But then if you ask them specifically, what thing do you have that if you're aware that your position on this issue is different from his, they'll say yes. So they're trying to make it seem as if they're alike this person, but then their positions vary on this wide range of issues. Really, the only thing that's kind of kept its its course in terms of just things he was in favor of that Republicans still like is the hawkishness on foreign policy. Bombings and attacking places, and and whether it was the invasion of Grenada, just those things are still favored and liked. But now it's by both parties. So again, it shows the lack of singularity that we're seeing. Let's see here. Okay, so we've succeeded in keeping Envoy asleep. I'm very happy. He's been knocked out. I think I've reached the wasn't he an angel? Who was an angel? No, I checked the ZZ comment. I think was that the last one I'm looking. Okay, there's also the theory of a group of people who work behind the scenes that don't show their faces, who aren't presidents. Yeah, they have advisors. That's one of the things that's been levied at a lot of these older presidents where they'll say, no, the one after that. Okay, check, where is this thing, man? I don't see it. There is no comment after that. I'm looking at it. I think Envoy is trolling. This is how he gets his kicks. Yeah, I was getting a little confused. All these, no, no, is it this comment? No, it's the one up there. Is it that comment? No, it's the one down there. Is it this comment? No, it's up there. No, it's down there. So I was just, that. Yeah, they're also responsible for Tupac's death in Vegas. Not the fact that he beat up a man and decided to go right down the street. Whatever. We're getting to another top. We'll get into that topic later on. Tell you, man, I get so tired of these conspiracy theories. They're just, I actually had a guy who was riding in his vehicle with me, and I say that as discreetly as it is just to show my appreciation with not being around that person with any level of frequency. And he said, "Yeah, the Reagan assassination attempt was a conspiracy to get him to go with the government. Because how all that Secret Service protection? How was someone able to get around Reagan like that? So yeah, he was able to get that close because the agents were in on it." I thought to myself, so the agents were so willing to get him shot that they would throw themselves in the way to defend him while he was getting shot. It's just like the claim that Johnson was involved in JFK's death, and then he's riding the car right next to him. What other presidents do you think are overrated? Um, Clinton, Obama. Um, I guess just those two. The other ones I actually think have gotten to a point where they're underrated. Uh, and that would be a more interesting and longer series to do because I'm getting a little tapped out even from just sitting here and thinking of more things relating to Reagan I don't like. But the JFK one is the worst out of all of them. I mean, they make that man. You would think that between 1961 to November of 1963, we were experiencing the second coming of Christ. I mean, it was just asinine, man. They loved this guy. And I go and look at his record because I've called myself someone who likes to, you know, be educated on who I'm talking about. And I just sat here and go, what is so good about him? It'll be interesting to see who the next president is. See. Well, Saberwolf, when would you like to see those videos? Because I could probably do one more stream after this, but so I'm willing and able to start that one up after we wrap this one up. Okay, so in conclusion, well, that's kind of an open-ended. Okay, we'll Saberwolf. We'll do the underrated one at the start of next year. So since it's up to me. In conclusion, I think there's more validity to people trying to make Reagan be their hero than with JFK. I get tired of the fact that not only was Reagan's vice president much more. Do it after this one. Okay, thanks for the envoy. And not only was Reagan's a vice president much more sophisticated on pretty much every matter than he was, but also his own positions and policies, at least a very good chunk of them, have been abandoned by his party, and the only remaining part of his ideology to still exist is the labeling of oneself as conservative. I don't even know what that term means anymore. Fiscal conservative. I say that I'm inspired by a guy who raised the deficit almost 3 times as much as that of any of his predecessors in the first 80 years of the 20th century. I say I'm anti illegal immigration, and my role model was the guy that gave amnesty to millions of illegal immigrants. It makes no sense to me, but that's their string to play. I just hope that we get to a point where people will wake up and realize that these presidents that are so frequently brought up and mentioned and tossed out as iconic, other than that top pantheon that I've mentioned kind of here and there, really have nothing going for them. So that's just my opinion. But thank you, and I'll have the other stream after this one, so don't go anywhere.